It was a normal evening, until we sat down to dinner. She, Ashley, looked especially beautiful as always, with a slightly nervous expression on her face, but I didn't pay attention. It always seemed to me that this was just her way of being open. That's how she is, my wife, always wearing a slightly tense mask on her face, even on calm family evenings. Dinner wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but that all changed when we met Josh. It sounds like a standard scene, right? But something about this meeting alarmed me. We were all sitting at a table when he walked into the restaurant. Josh. His face was familiar, but not the way I remembered it. Maybe a little haggard, a little clouded by something I couldn't see. He was a couple of years older than me, but he looked much older. Somehow, you realize that this man has been through more than he can show on the surface. But that's not what made me feel uneasy. When he saw us, his eyes lingered on Ashley for a second. And it wasn't just a greeting, it was a look I'd seen before, and it had nothing to do with friendship. It was as if Josh forgot for a moment that we were at the table, and his attention was focused only on her. It wasn't just the joy of meeting her. It was more than that. I noticed it, even though I was trying to put it behind me. Jack, don't make a big deal out of it, I thought. But she noticed my reaction and immediately became more tense. At first I thought it was just my imagination. I usually jump to conclusions too quickly, and maybe I was imagining it because I was tired or something. But she started talking too much. All these standard things about how long it's been since we've seen each other, how things have changed in our lives, how Josh now works for another company, but not once did she mention why she had this nervous smile on her face. It was as if she was afraid that I would notice something. And that's when I realized something was wrong. I began to observe. Dinner went on, but my thoughts did not leave me. At one point, I even asked Josh to leave his contacts for work so that I could throw a couple of updates on the social network, because he works in the digital sphere, and it made sense. I knew he had been in touch with various companies for a long time and definitely had some useful contacts. Maybe I just needed to do something to keep my mind off my wife and her strange behavior. After dinner, when we left the restaurant, I noticed she was acting too nervous. She kept glancing at me, and when I turned around, she quickly looked away. I could hear the tension in her voice. Again, I wanted to just ask her what was wrong, but something held me back. I knew she didn't like me prying into her personal affairs. "What's wrong with you?" I asked when we got into the car. "You looked like you were hiding something." She was silent, and it became clear to me that she wasn't going to answer. But I couldn't just let it go. "It's not what you think," she finally spoke, and I realized that it wasn't just an excuse. There was more than just denial in her voice. There was real anxiety. I left her with those words, but that very evening I began my little investigation. I was bothered by how her reaction had changed dramatically after we saw Josh. That same evening, I logged onto her social media without her knowledge, of course. I knew it wasn't entirely fair, but at the time I had no choice. I was looking for at least some trace. And that's when I found something strange. The correspondence between her and Josh was old, with a few messages she had deleted. At first it looked like a normal friendship, but with each new letter I could see how they were becoming more intimate. I scrolled back through the pages, and when I came across messages dated several years ago, everything became clear. "You've always been more than a friend to me, Josh. And I won't tell anyone if you don't want me to." My heart leapt. How could she? How could she keep this a secret for so many years? I decided to talk to her, but not right now. I needed more proof so I wouldn't look suspicious. I had to wait and be careful. I realized that this was a big mistake and that I was now trapped in my suspicions and emotions. The next day, I started paying more attention to her behavior. She continued to pretend that everything was fine, but I could see it and she could no longer hide it. I kept up the pressure by talking to friends who knew Josh. They confirmed that there was something more between them than just an old friendly acquaintance. I began to realize that she had been with him for a long time, even when we were still together when I chose her. I could not stand by. In the morning, after another evening, I decided to talk to her openly. "Ashley," I said when we got home, I know you're with him. It's not just a friendship, and I can't hide it anymore." She turned pale and her hands started to shake. Her eyes closed, as if she hoped I would stop talking. But I couldn't. I couldn't live with these doubts anymore. Jack, it's not what you think. I didn't want to do it, I couldn't. She started to speak, but I felt that her words only confirmed what I already understood. The silence was broken only by my voice when I said, "You've been with him for a long time, right?" For the first time, she looked me straight in the eye. "Yes," she whispered softly, "but I love you." I don't know how it happened. I couldn't tell you that. I stopped talking. Everything was said. It was harder than I could have imagined. Even harder than finding out the truth. We sat in silence, and I realized that nothing was going to come back. The silence between us was the worst of all. We were sitting in a room where we had previously discussed the future, where everything seemed stable and carefree. All these years of building our lives together were now like an illusion that had shattered into small pieces. I waited for her to explain, but she said nothing. All words had already lost their meaning. She was silent, watching my face, trying to find at least some reaction, but I remained cold, even to myself. I was devastated. How could this have happened? How could she have kept this from me all these years? Jack, her voice was quiet, almost frightened. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know it's hard, but it was just so hard. I stood up and started walking around the room, trying to cope with this helplessness that gripped me. Every move she made, every word she said, only made the pain worse, but at the same time gave me clarity. Now I realized that this was not just a betrayal, it was a lie that had been going on for years. She kept me in the dark. I don't understand, I said, stopping and looking at her. How could you live like this? How could you hide it from me? How could I not notice it? She looked up, but I didn't see any confidence in her eyes. Her face was tired, like a person who has been carrying a heavy burden for years. I was afraid of losing you, Jack, she said quietly, afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd leave me. I don't know how it started, but over time I realized it was more than just friendship. And I couldn't stop it. And then I couldn't stand it anymore. My anger exploded, not even knowing where to direct it. At her? At myself? Or at Josh, who I now hated more than anyone? This is more than just friendship? I laughed, but it was a laugh of pain, bitterness, and disappointment. You couldn't just stop it? You chose him over me. You decided he deserved your feelings more than I. And you kept hiding it. I looked at her, and everything was boiling inside me, but at the same time I felt some kind of hopelessness. It seemed that no matter how much I said, it wouldn't change anything. She had already made her decision, and now I was just witnessing her disintegration. I don't know what to do, Jack. Again her voice sounded like she was trying to find a single word that could justify what she had done. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. You didn't know? I interrupted her. You didn't know that this secret would destroy me? You didn't think it mattered? She collapsed onto the couch, her arms crossed over her chest, trying to steady herself. It was obviously hard for her, but it was even harder for me. It was not just a moment of anger. It was the death of our intimacy, our life in one small moment. I didn't know what to do. My first reaction was to run away. I wanted to just walk out of that room and never come back. It was all too painful. Instead, I went out to the balcony to take a deep breath and see if I was ready for what I had to do next. I took my time. I didn't throw accusations at her. I knew inside that I needed to keep digging, that I needed to understand even more. What if this whole situation was part of something bigger? What if Josh wasn't just her lover, but part of something I still didn't understand? So I started looking at everything in more detail. I found old photos, old messages, old memories that didn't add up. It turned out that their relationship had lasted much longer than I had imagined. It was not something spontaneous. It was a systematic and careful intervention in our life together. I remembered how she always talked about his old memories, how her eyes always clouded over when he was mentioned. Now it made sense. I also realized that Josh had his own purpose in all of this. It wasn't just physical attraction or a casual affair. It was a way of controlling me. I didn't want to admit it, but I couldn't help but see it. Josh could manipulate her, and it looked like he was doing it. My investigation revealed more and more truths. Their relationship had become a part of her life so deeply that I was no longer the main figure. Now I was superfluous, an outsider. And she knew it. I decided not to wait any longer. I needed to see Josh, to talk to him. Now I was ready to see his eyes, to hear his words. I didn't care what she said, I wanted to see how he behaved when he knew I knew everything. I called him the next day. "Josh, I'll meet you," I said briefly when he picked up the phone. "Jack, you mean what?" His voice was calm, almost self-assured. "I know everything, I didn't play games. You and Ashley. We need to talk. You're not going to be left out." He was silent for a few seconds, and it was enough for me to realize that he wasn't surprised. He was ready for this. "Okay," he finally said, "I'll meet you at the bar on Grave Street." When I got there, I saw him at a table in the corner, relaxed, with a cup of coffee. He was calm, and I could feel my fists clenching with anger. I could not believe that this had become a reality. Sitting down across from him, I broke down. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" He looked at me with a slight smile. It was not the smile of someone who was sorry, but of someone who considers himself a winner. "Jack," he said with lazy indifference, "you know it was a long time ago. So what, you're going to moralize to me now?" I couldn't take it anymore. "It's not just a long time ago, Josh. It's part of what ruined my life." He shrugged. "Your life wasn't as perfect as you thought it was. You weren't the perfect man for her. Maybe if you had listened more, instead of living in your illusions, things would have been different." Those words pierced me. I felt my strength leaving me, but I couldn't give up. "You chose her, Josh. You destroyed my life for your own desires." He looked up as if he was waiting for me to say more, but I said nothing. What else could I say? At that moment, we both knew that she had chosen him. And now, if I want to have any peace of mind, I have to make a choice. A few days later, after talking to Josh, I made up my mind. My wife was not the woman I loved. She was different. And I was a different person now. I couldn't go on living in a lie. I turned to Ashley and said, "We need to talk about us." She started apologizing again, trying to explain everything, but I wasn't listening anymore. I knew that this time I couldn't just forgive. What was I supposed to do? We sat there in silence, and I just knew. That moment was the end. And even though I loved her, I couldn't stay any longer. "I'm leaving," I said. She looked at me, and her eyes were full of tears. But I couldn't stay any longer. I took my things, put them in my bag and left. That was the end of it. I did not know what would happen next. Every step I took was like walking through a field of rubble, where every move I made and every choice I made left new cracks in the world I once thought was stable and unshakable. I thought that after all this I would feel relieved. But instead, I was filled with emptiness. Emptiness because I just couldn't go back to the life I had and didn't know how to move forward. I left our house, but I didn't know where I was going. I guess it was the same hopelessness I felt when I first found out the truth. I had to leave Ashley because my own dignity and self-confidence demanded it. But I didn't know how to live without her yet. How to get over it, when your hand reached out to her at night, and now you just can't touch her even with your eyes. My older sister, Sarah, was the first to know about it. She was more than just a relative to me. She was the one who always supported me, even when I made bad choices. She knew about all my disappointments, but in this case, of course, I hope she wouldn't say, "I told you so." She was for me, even if I had such a difficult choice. "Jack, you made the right choice," she said when I came to her house late at night, as if running away from the world. Her hug was as warm as ever, and I felt a desperate need for that reassurance. You can't be with someone who has been lying to you for so many years. You deserve better than that. I sat down on a chair, lit a cigarette, and took a few breaths as I tried to get a word out. "You don't understand," I stuttered, "I never thought it was that deep. I never thought I could lose her like this." Sarah looked at me carefully. Her gaze was calm, but also penetrating. She was the kind of person who understood when silence was the only thing to say. "Yes, Jack, I understand. But you can't hold on to something that is destroying you. And she is destroying you. If she stayed with you for so long knowing she has another life, it's not love, it's just a habit. And you deserve more than being part of someone's fake reality. I didn't answer because I couldn't find the right words. It was still hard to believe that all this had happened. Now that I had left her, I was worse off than I had ever imagined. But I knew I had to leave. To save my soul, I had to leave her, even if it was painful. A few days passed and life started to become clearer. During the first week, I hardly left the house. My apartment looked like I had just moved in. I tried to find something to be interested in. At first, I thought I wanted to be alone to figure things out, but then I realized I didn't want that. I needed time, but I didn't need to go into complete isolation. I started going to the gym, returned to my old hobbies that I had long ago abandoned due to work and family responsibilities. All these things that had seemed so unimportant before suddenly became important to me. I realized that I could now get myself back, my old version. However, there was one thing I could not have predicted. She came. Ashley. She knocked on my door 2 weeks after I left her. And while I was prepared for it, I wasn't prepared for what she had to say. I opened the door. She looked like she was tired of fighting with herself. "Jack, can I talk to you?" Her voice was so quiet that I almost didn't hear it. I stopped for a moment, but then gave in. Maybe it was the wrong decision, but I couldn't kick her out. "Come in," I said, shaking my head slightly. She came in, and I closed the door behind her. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I didn't know what she wanted to say, or if I was really ready to hear it. "I don't know how to start," she said, pulling her hands together again like a person who is confused. "I don't want it to be like this, Jack. I love you, but I've made a huge mistake. You have a right to everything you're feeling right now. And I'm ready to take responsibility for everything that happened." I was silent. My emotions remained uncertain, like a storm that was just beginning. Do you want me to believe what you're saying?" I asked, although I knew it was more of a rhetorical question. She lowered her head as if ashamed of her own words. "I don't know how to fix this, Jack, but I don't want to lose you. I realize that everything has changed, and I can't turn back the clock. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to show you that I can be better." Now it was my turn to be silent. I didn't want to hear those words. I didn't know if she really wanted to change or if it was just a fear of loss. "Ashley," I said, looking up, "you can't come back to me. You may love me, but you can't just hide what you've done. You put me in last place when you needed me the most." She started crying, and I heard those tears, but I couldn't help her. "I don't know what to do, Jack," she whispered through her tears. "I was so stupid. I didn't want this. And I'm ready to change everything if you give me a chance." I stood there looking at her. And although there was a lot of pain in my soul, I already realized that I couldn't fall into the trap she had created for us again. That was the moment when I finally decided that my future was not with her. "You made your choice," I said, my voice no longer filled with anger or pain, only cold determination, "and now I'm making mine." She looked at me with the last of her hope in her eyes, but I could see that it didn't matter anymore. One more moment, and I could have forgotten her. But I didn't. It was her problem now, not mine. I left her standing there and went into the room. A few minutes later, I heard her quietly leave the apartment. And although I didn't know what would happen next, I finally felt that the choice was right. I was free. After Ashley left, life became strange. I didn't seem to exist in any reality, neither in the past nor in the future. I sat in an empty apartment, looking at the walls that still held echoes of our lives, the paintings we had chosen together, the furniture we had both collected. And it all felt alien, as if she and I were strangers, even though it was our home. The days became gray, and I tried to find at least some sense in what had happened. Was it a test? Or was it just that I couldn't see the obvious? Maybe I was naive, and now this was my punishment. I thought a lot about Josh, about his role in this whole situation. Was he really just an old friend as she said, or was this his game from the beginning? I couldn't take it anymore because I realized Josh wasn't just taking advantage of her weaknesses, he was playing by different rules. And I was just a pawn on his chessboard. I never spoke to Ashley again, although she wrote to me several times, trying to break through the wall of silence. I knew she was hoping for my forgiveness, but I couldn't give it to her anymore. I didn't believe her words because they sounded like an excuse for something that could no longer be justified. I wasn't ready to let her back into my life because I felt that if I did, I would end up in the same trap again. Maybe that was his plan to make me so weak that I would never be able to resist, even when I realized. Josh was just like that. He had a power I hadn't noticed before. I would say that he was a monk practicing manipulation, but he was also a man I had once called a friend. And now I realized that he had simply abandoned the role of friend long before I realized it. I needed to get my mind off it. I started going to work often, not staying late in the evenings. However, even that didn't give me the sense of calm I needed. I was like a zombie, moving through life, unable to say to myself, "This has already passed." Everything felt eternal and heavy. And then 3 weeks after I left Ashley, I got a phone call. It was Josh. It was him again. "Jack, we need to talk," he said, and there was none of his usual self-assurance in his voice, only cold determination. It surprised me. And at the same time, it gave me an instinctive feeling that he was looking for control, that he wouldn't go down without a fight. "What are we talking about?" I asked immediately, trying to keep my voice calm. "You know what I mean." His voice became sharp. "Ashley can't continue to live in this chaos. You realize what you've done to her, right?" I felt the blood pulse through my veins. This wasn't just manipulation. It was an attempt to make me return to this situation, to return to what I was trying to forget. "I don't want to talk to you," I replied, trying to be as cold as possible. "Everything between us is over." "Do you want to believe that it's over? Do you think you're going to get away with it?" His voice sounded like he was enjoying my pain. "Think again, Jack." And that was it. My emotions were torn in two. I didn't know what would happen next. Josh was interfering in my life again, and I could feel everything I had tried to build after leaving Ashley start to crumble. I couldn't let it happen, but he was cunning. He knew how to annoy me. "What do you want from me, Josh?" I asked, trying not to give in to my anger. "Did you think I would leave you?" He laughed, like a predator who realizes that his victim can no longer escape. "And even if you think I was just playing with you, you still have to put it behind you." I put the phone down without answering. His words pierced me, and I realized that he would not leave me alone. He wouldn't get out of my head, and I wouldn't be able to just forget him. This was not just a conflict. It was a struggle for power and control. And in this struggle, I was definitely the loser. I didn't call him the next day, but I knew that sooner or later he would come back. And I had to do something to break out of this circle. I started meeting new people, not to get over Ashley quickly, but to realize that there was more to life than the ruins this relationship had left. I met Claire, a young woman who worked in the same cafe where I sometimes had lunch. She was open and sincere, completely different from Ashley. Although I had no intention of starting a new relationship, her company became an outlet for me. We talked often, and she helped me see that my life perspective was limited. And although I wasn't ready for a new relationship, I began to realize that I couldn't stand still any longer. I needed to move forward. Even if it was hard, even if I still had the scar of betrayal in my heart, I had to move forward. One day, as Claire and I were walking in the park, I received another call from Josh. But this time I was ready for it. "What do you want, Josh?" I asked when I picked up the phone. "I want you to understand," he said, again trying to manipulate my emotions, "you're not going to let her go. And you're not going to let go of all of this." I didn't say a word, but the process started in my head. I'm not going to let this control my life anymore. I'm not going to let anyone else decide how I'm going to live my life. "You're right," I said, after a pause, "but it's not your decision. It is mine." And I ended the conversation. Claire looked at me in surprise, but did not ask what had happened. She knew I was trying to be strong. And that was what I needed, not explanations, not pity, but just the opportunity to be myself. It was the moment when I felt real. Real in my choice. And even though I didn't know what the future would bring, I felt like I had made the right move. A few months passed. Life became different. Josh didn't bother me anymore. And although I didn't get back into a relationship with Ashley, I realized that during my time away from her, I had started to put myself first. I was no longer holding on to things that could not come back. I was no longer afraid of the future. My story didn't end in divorce, as I had once imagined. It was a story about taking back control of my life. And even though the road was thorny, I now knew one thing: never let any person steal your soul. And even if it meant leaving everything behind to start over, it was a price I was willing to pay. Time passed, and I found peace. It wasn't a moment when all the questions were answered and all the pain disappeared. No, it was a process. And every day, every minute without her presence in my life became easier, even if I still remembered her sometimes with bitterness, sometimes with understanding. I was no longer a slave to my feelings, which seemed to rule my life until very recently. People's perspectives change when they start to see themselves again. I started to change when I stopped expecting everything to be the way I imagined it to be. I no longer wanted to control every aspect of my life, and even if I was haunted by residual doubts, I learned to accept them instead of fighting them. And then one evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, which still smelled of fresh paint and new furniture, I remembered how I used to sit on that same balcony with Ashley. How we laughed as we discussed our plans for the future, how we believed that everything would be fine. And although we had our own ideals back then, today I could see that it wasn't because we were both wrong. It was just that our paths diverged. I had no regrets about leaving her. And although I felt the pain of not being able to create what I wanted, I realized that sometimes it takes time to see the true face of those you love and those who love you. And if you are not the first to take this step toward the truth, it will come anyway. It was the best choice for both of us. I no longer missed the past, and I no longer expected other people to change. The change started with me. And as I sat there staring at the night sky, I felt that I could now be at peace. I didn't expect anything extraordinary from life, but in that peace there was more freedom than I could have imagined. Claire, who had become my close friend and at that time was no longer just an acquaintance who occasionally helped me escape from dark thoughts, sat next to me. She did not ask about my past, and I was grateful to her for that. We talked about simple things, books, movies, and sometimes laughed at little things that became important. And it was better than anything I could have imagined before. I took my time. And eventually, even though my heart wasn't completely healed, I stopped trying to find the perfect version of myself or anyone else. I just became who I was, and that was enough. Claire put her arm around my shoulders as if to thank me for the moment we shared. She didn't ask me the question why anymore, because she had already realized that everyone has to go through this path on their own. And maybe that was the whole point. Maybe sometimes we need to go through pain, through disappointment, to understand who we really are. Life went on. And maybe I would find new love someday, maybe not. But now I knew one thing: I wasn't looking for anything, I wasn't waiting for miracles. I was living, and that was enough. And when I turned my gaze back to that night sky, I felt the echoes of an old song that Ashley and I used to listen to together. I smiled. There was no more anger, no more regret. Only acceptance. And that was the greatest victory. Because sometimes, to find yourself, you have to let go of what once was and allow yourself to move on.